So in this episode, we're going to take a look at our first project we're going to do together. Well, it's not really a big project, but it's more or less of a small exercise in order to actually use what we've learned so far in object-oriented PHP and try it out inside something that we can actually use for something. I am wearing my leather jacket. It is slightly cold inside my new office. This is a new office, by the way, in case you didn't know. Right now, I'm using this opportunity to or at least this excuse to wear something cool. Now, I do apologize if you can hear some squeaking because leather jackets apparently are a little bit squeaky when I move around. So I hope it doesn't get captured by the microphone. But what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be doing a calculator, which is sort of a tradition to do on my channel. So I thought we would do that as well when it comes to object-oriented PHP. So what I have so far, just to sort of tell you where I am at the moment so you can sort of catch up to it before we start doing the actual PHP part. Because what I've done here is just a little bit of pre-work, which is basic HTML. So it's not really something that you haven't learned before watching this course here. So what I have so far is I do actually have my index page. I still have my strict types set to 1 up here at the top to make sure that if we declare or do type declarations inside our PHP code that we can actually use it properly. I do also have this include to include my autoload function, which autoloads classes if I were to reference to a class inside our code here. And at the bottom, I do also have a basic HTML form. So inside this form, you can see that I have, first of all, a small title that says my own calculator. We could also put it on top of the form, doesn't really matter. And I do also have an input for the first number we're going to do for the calculator. I just simply set the type to number, set a name to num1, which is what we're going to reference to in the next document that we need to run in order to actually perform the PHP code. And then I just have a placeholder that says first number. Below here, I have a selector. So we can select to add, subtract, divide, multiply. Again, you can add to this if you want to and create something quite a bit more complicated than what I have here. This is just a basic example to give you an idea about how we implement classes in regular PHP stuff or just regular, functions inside a website. And then underneath here, I have the second number, which is identical to the first one. I just changed it to num2 instead of num1 and then said second number instead. And then we have the button at the bottom, which is pretty much the last thing that we need to have. And it's just a regular submit button. It just has a title or a text inside of it as calculate. So it's very basic. I can't show how it looks like inside the browser right now because we do have an error message that we need to take care of. So what we need to do here, because there's a little bit more work to do, is I'm going to go inside my root folder of this project here, the same place where I have my index file. And inside my root folder, I do have 2 folders. I have a includes folder that has 2 documents in it, and I have a classes folder. Now inside my classes folder, what I want you to go ahead and do is create a new file called calc.class.php. This is going to be the one that has our calc or calculator class inside of it. As you can see right now, mine is empty. I can actually go ahead and zoom in for you so you can actually see what's going on here. And inside my includes folder, I have a autoload document, which is the one that we learned about previously in a previous episode. I do want to point something out here because as you can see, this is actually what we learned from the previous episode. But in some cases inside a website, like the one we have here, if I were to use this function here, it works perfectly if I'm inside the main directory of my root folder, meaning from my index page. But if I were to be inside, let's say the includes folder, and I have a document loaded inside the browser from the includes folder, and I want to load the same autoload function, I need to change the path inside this autoload function. So what I did is a little bit further down is I created a second version, which we're going to replace with the one we learned from a previous episode. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and delete all the way up to the top, just so you can see the 2 of them at the same time. And all I want you to notice here is that I included, well, actually this one was not part of the one you had as well. So there we go. Now it looks like it's supposed to. What I included is a URL inside a variable. So the URL for our current website. And if we do have includes as a string inside the URL, it means that we're right now inside the includes folder. which means that the path has to change. So all I did was I created an if-else statement that says, okay, if we're inside the includes folder, then we're going to just create a .. inside the path in front of the path to tell the path to go back one directory and then inside our classes folder. So that's all I did here. I just added this small if-else statement and everything else should basically be the same. So replace this above here with, let's actually go ahead and make sure we don't delete the PHP tags. Go ahead and replace that with what I have here to make sure you don't get some kind of error message. So after doing this, you can actually see that we don't have an error message anymore. So in here, you can actually see the calculator we built inside the index page. So this is progress. We have a calculator now. So what we can do is I can go ahead and type in a number. We can also do what we can do here, you know, go up and down in numbers because I set the type to a number type. We can choose a second number and then we can choose whether to add, subtract, divide or multiply. And then we can then calculate. Then it's going to take us to another page where the calculation is going to happen. Now, right now, nothing's happening because if I were to go back inside our project, you can see that inside my includes folder, I have a calc.inc.php, not a .class.php. It's not the class page. If I were to load up the class page, this is the class page. No, the other one is called calc.inc.php, which means that it's just an include file that doesn't contain classes, but it's an include file that we load inside the website that we don't actually see inside the website. That's basically why I call it .inc something. I think I've explained this in the past before, so this shouldn't really be new information, I think. But inside this file, you can see we have nothing except for an opening and a closing tag when it comes to PHP code. And what I want to do here is I want to actually grab the data from the form because this is the class that or the document that we load up once we click the submit button. So I want to grab the data, meaning the first number, the operator type, and the second number, and then I want to run them using some of the class methods that we're going to create inside our calc class. So let's go ahead and start by creating our class first. So in this example here, since we're creating a calculator, it would make sense that we create the properties first. In this example, there's going to be 3 properties. So we're going to say we have a public, if I can actually see something because my microphone is in the way. We have a public operator to start with, because that is going to be the first one we have here. Then I'm going to create a public num1. So public num1. It's kind of good I'm typing slow because of the microphone, because then you can actually keep up with the lesson here. I'm also going to go ahead and create a public let's actually do this. Where is it? There we go. num2. Need to find a solution for this in the future. So once we have the properties here, we need to create the methods. Now these properties right now don't have a value. We haven't set it yet. So what we need to do is once we load this class and actually instantiate the class and create an object, is we need to fill in these properties once that happens. And we do that using a constructor. So we're going to create a public, and I'm just going to say public function, and we're going to call this one __ construct. See if I can actually type this correctly. There we go. Messing quite a bit up because I can't see the keyboard. Inside this constructor, we're just going to go ahead and fill in these properties. So we're going to start by just adding in what kind of data we want to have inside the parentheses of the constructor. So I'm going to start by saying I want to have a string data type, and this string data type is going to be the one called operator. Just so we have the same name as above. Like, do keep in mind that what I have here is not this thing here. The information we have inside the construct parentheses is actually the data that gets passed from the user inside the form, not the properties up here. We could actually do something slightly different just so you don't get confused. Let's go ahead and call this one, let's just go ahead and call this something like 1. Because I want to show you exactly what is going on here, because some people might have missed this concept. So I'm just going to say we want to grab a string, which is called, in this case here, 1. Then I want to grab a integer data type. This one is going to be called 2. And then I want to grab another int, which is going to be the second number, and I'm just going to go ahead and call this one 3. Is that how you spell 3? That is how you spell 3. It's either with or without the H, but in this case it's with the H. So now we have these 3 different parameters that gets passed into this method that we're going to assign to these properties up here. So in the first one, I'm going to say that we have this. Then I'm going to point to the property that is upstairs. So I'm going to say operator. And in this case here, I am actually referring to this one up here. I could actually just copy paste since I sort of messed it up down there. Make sure we don't reference to variable, but just the property operator. And then I'm going to set it equal to the data we pass in here, which is going to be the string that we pass in. So I'm just going to say it is going to be equal to 1. Now, does it start to make sense why we don't necessarily have to call these the same as up here? Like in practice, we do actually call it the same. So I would actually be naming it like this, but it doesn't refer to this up here. It is just a thing that we do as PHP programmers to make sure that it makes sense further down here. So when we pass it in, it makes sense because it looks like they go together. But you don't have to. That's what I'm trying to say here. The second one we're going to create is going to be the num1 that we have up here. So I'm just going to say we have num1 without the variable, and that is going to be 2. TWO. Then we're going to have num2 without the variable. That is going to be 3, like so. So what we basically did here is we said, okay, once we create this object based off the class here, at the same moment, we're going to take 3 different parameters and we're going to assign them to these properties inside the class. That's all we're doing here. We don't have to do anything else inside the constructor here. What we're then going to do is we're going to go ahead and actually create a method that actually calculates this calculator for us. So what I can do is I can create another method. So I'm going to say function. Let's actually make it public first. Public function. And I'm just going to go ahead and call this one calculator, parentheses, curly brackets. And do note that one of the differences between, like we could pass in 3 different parameters inside the calculator method here. I could have passed in the operator, the number1 and number2 inside the calculator method and then calculate it that way. But because I want to use operators in this class here and just assign it, we're going to do it that way. So we're going to use the constructor to create, to pass in the parameters first, and then we don't need to do it down here in the method later on. Kind of a neat thing. So inside the calculator, I'm going to just go ahead and create a switch, just a regular PHP switch, not the Nintendo kind. Ha 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 ha. Okay. So inside the switch here, we need to have some kind of data that is going to say, well, depending on this piece of data, we're going to do one or the other thing. So in this case here, I want to say, well, depending on the operator that was chosen, and do keep in mind, when we create the object, the operator up here is going to be set, like it will be created, meaning that I can just go ahead and refer to this operator inside this class here. I do think I spelled this wrong. Operator, that's with an O, isn't it? Let's go ahead and change that. There we go. I think that is correct, isn't it? I have notes on the side here, so I know for a fact this is correct. I'm just looking notes and thinking, huh, that doesn't look the same. So, well, this is how we do it. So we reference to this operator inside, or the operator property inside this class here, and depending on the value of it, if it does say that the value is add, which we're going to add later once we create the object, then it has to do something specific down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called result. I'm going to set it equal to, then I'm going to again point to num1, which is the operator we have inside this class here. And then I'm going to say plus num2, which is a property inside this class here, inside the object. So what I can then do is I can go ahead and say I want to return, and then I want to return result. And that's basically it. Now we can actually add something inside our calculator, at least when it comes to the class part, and it will be working. So we also need to create one for subtraction, we need to create one for division, and one for multiplication. So if I go down here, And just go ahead and paste it in, because there's no need to not just paste it in. Just gonna move it back so it matches up perfectly. There we go. There might be some bumping inside the microphone because my keyboard is also kind of loose on the table there. I'm gonna change the first one. Oh, we do actually need to move back one more. There we go. I do need to change the second one. So it is right now sub for subtract. I want to change the second one to div for divide. And then mul for multiply. And then we just need to change the, the operators in here. So it's going to be minus, it's going to be divide, and it's going to be multiplication. That is not multiplication. This is multiplication. I did pass basic math once, so I should know how to multiply. Then if we go down inside the default outcome of the switch, in case some kind of error happens, then we want to just simply, I don't know, echo out a message or something. So we're just gonna echo out error, like so, just to notify that there was an error message inside what we did here. Once we've done this, we do actually have everything we need to have inside our class. So now we're actually done with our calc class. So if I were to go back inside our calc.inc.php file, the one that actually gets run after we submit the form, then we can actually go ahead and do very little in here actually, because remember, the class does most of the work. We just need to reference to, okay, so now we have all the work done over here. Now, what do I want to just like use from the class in order to do what I need to do here? So doing it with classes is a very cool process because we can just keep reusing code again and again and again. And that's one of the big perks about using classes instead of procedural PHP, because then we'd have to rewrite the code again and again and again. So if I were to go in here, the first thing we need to do is we need to, again, declare the strict types, because that's the thing we need to do. I do also need to include our autoload function that is inside our autoload.inc.php file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the path, because we don't need to dig inside an includes folder anymore, because we are right now inside the includes folder. So I just need to delete the first part of the path here. Let's just go ahead and move it out so it looks nice and shift everything down just to create some spacing. So what I need to do now is I basically just need to grab the data from inside the index page when we actually submit the form. So we're going to say, well, we have a variable. Just going to call this one upper for operator. And I'm just going to go ahead and set this one equal to $_post. And we're just going to go ahead and grab the operator. Now we did call this one upper, or at least I did inside the index page, just because I got the question from a previous episode. So let me just tell you why I referenced to upper. If I go back inside my index page where I have my form and go down to one of the inputs, let's take the selector here. You can see the name is set to upper. That means when I submit this form, and again, this should be basic HTML, you should know this by now, but I'm just gonna say it again. Then once we need to grab the data from the form here, we need to reference to upper to get the data they selected here. Then with number 1, because name is equal to num1, we need to reference to num1. And then the second one down here is num2. So that's why we do that, just in case you needed that refreshed. Which again, is okay. It's okay to get stuff refreshed, but it is one of those things that you should be very familiar with right now. So num1, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and copy paste num1. Just gonna copy paste this part here. There we go, and change it to 2 and 2. So now we have all the data we need from the previous form, and now we can actually start running the calculation, which means all I need to do is I need to actually create an object of the class called calc. So what I can do is I create just a variable called calc. This is going to be the object, and I'm going to set it equal to new calc parentheses semicolon. And do remember, because we have a constructor inside here, this constructor right here, we do need to pass in 3 different parameters. So if we were to go back again, we need to include those 3, which is going to be upper, which is going to be num1, and it's going to be num2. Now there is going to be a small error here though, because when we pass in the data, it is going to pass num1 and num2 as strings. And we need to have integers because remember, once we went inside our constructor, we did actually specifically ask for integers. So because of the type declaration, we do actually need to do something called casting, which means that once we do something with these numbers, I'm just going to cast this to an int to convert it to an integer. This is something we can easily do if you can't just like directly do it. So I'm just going to cast it to integers. This is also something that's basic PHP, but I don't think that I taught it in my PHP course. I am remaking the PHP course right now, so this will be something in that course. But we're just going to cast it to make sure that it's an integer type once we do actually use it. So now that we did this, all we need to do is run the method that actually calculates the whole thing. So going down to the next line, I'm going to run a try-catch block of code. And instead of an exception, we're actually going to try and catch a type error. So we're going to say type, if I can actually spell that, type error. And the error message will then be variable e if we do actually have an error message. So what I want to do here is if I get an error, I just simply want to echo. And I'm just going to go ahead and echo a string called error, exclamation mark, colon, space. And then I'm just going to go ahead and attach variable e, which is going to be the error message, and then say I want to get the actual message. I don't think we've talked about this in the PHP course either, but this is one way to just simply grab an error message when you do like a try-catch block. So what we need to actually do, if we succeed, it is going to run the block of code inside the try part of the try-catch block. So what we just basically need to do is we need to actually run the actual method. So I'm going to echo, and then I'm going to say we have variable calc, and I want to point to a method called calculation. That did not get spelled correctly. Did we call it calculation or calculate? Call it calculator. It's much easier just to copy paste. There we go. And like so. So now we should actually have a working calculator. So if I were to go ahead and test this out, which would probably be a good idea to do beforehand. If I'm going to go ahead and choose number 2, say I want to add, I want to choose number 3, calculate, you can see we get 5 if I zoom in. If I go back again, and you can actually see everything shifted around because I zoomed in, but that's okay. I can choose 5 and maybe 2 or 3. Let's change it to 2. And then say I want to multiply, calculate, then you see we get 10. So this is how we actually use classes and methods and properties in an actual example. One of the things I know people get confused about is they think they have to use the class and the methods and stuff inside the actual index page where the form is. But you're actually supposed to create a separate file, for example, an include file like this one I created here, and then run all the calculations and methods in here once you grab the data from the form. So that's how you need to go about doing that, because that is a question I get quite often when it comes to this. Like, how do you use classes together with forms inside, let's say, a contact page or something? And you do actually need to do that inside a separate document together. So I hope this was kind of useful. We will continue with these lessons in probably tomorrow or the day after tomorrow or something, because I am in a new office, so there should be more frequent uploads. But I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next one.